a whisper of dust, and the glint of a rifle barrel that's all that separated life from death in the Old West. But this isn't a story of gunslingers. It's a story of secrets of a love forged in conflict, and of a horse that understood a man's soul better than any human ever could. You're about to hear how a single stolen touch ignited a firestorm on the plains of Montana, how a poor, nameless cowboy held the fate of a cattle empire in the palm of his hand, and how a proud, rich rancher had her entire world shattered and rebuilt by the one man she was supposed to despise. The dust of the Montana plains had a taste. It was a gritty mineral tang that coated the tongue and settled deep in the lungs, a constant reminder that the land gave nothing for free. For most folks in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, this dust was the taste of survival. But for Arabella Sutton, it was the taste of ownership. From the sprawling veranda of the main house on Sutton's Crest, the largest and most prosperous ranch in the territory, the dust was merely a part of her kingdom, a hazy golden veil over the thousands of acres and tens of thousands of cattle that bore her father's brand. Arabella was a creature of stark contrasts, as sharp and defined as the mountains against the piercing blue sky. At 21, she possessed a beauty that was both refined and wild. Her hair, the color of polished mahogany, was often pinned in an elegant chignon that seemed at war with the few rebellious strands the prairie wind always managed to set free. Her dresses were imported from St. Louis, their fine fabrics and intricate lace a defiant splash of civilization against the untamed backdrop. Yet her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held a flinty resolve that belonged entirely to the West. She could ride as well as any of her father's ranch hands and shoot better than most. She was her father's daughter, and Colonel Beauregard Sutton valued strength above all else. The colonel was a man carved from ambition and iron will, a veteran of a war he seldom spoke of, but whose title he wore like a crown. He had come west with nothing, and built an emir through shrewd deals, relentless work, and a ruthlessness that was the stuff of local legend. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, and his daughter was his most prized asset. He intended to see her married to Sterling Hayes, a man whose ranching empire to the south was second only to his own. A union between them wouldn't be a marriage. It would be a merger, the creation of a dynasty that would rule Montana for generations. Arabella understood this. She didn't object, not truly. In her world, love was a luxury, and legacy was currency. The latest acquisition to the colonel's collection of assets was currently trying to tear down a specially reinforced corral. It was a stallion, a magnificent beast of midnight black, with muscles that coiled and bunched like enraged serpents. The colonel had purchased him for an exorbitant sum from a desperate outfit up north, intending to breed a new line of superior quarter horses. He had named the horse Ares after the god of war, and the name was fitting. Ares was pure distilled violence. In the 2 weeks since his arrival, he had crippled one ranch hand and sent 2 more scrambling over the fence with little more than their lives. He was untamable, a force of nature trapped within wooden confines, and he was becoming a very expensive, very public embarrassment. Arabella stood by the corral, now her gloved hands resting on the top rail, her lips pressed into a thin, frustrated line. Her father stood beside her. His broad shoulders squared his face, a mask of stony displeasure. Sterling Hayes, visiting for the afternoon, leaned against a post, a smug little smile playing on his lips as he watched the horse rear and kick its screams of fury echoing across the ranch. "A magnificent animal, Colonel," Sterling said, his voice smooth as polished silver. "But spirit like that, sometimes it can't be broken. Sometimes you just have to put it down." The suggestion hung in the air, vile and practical. It made Arabella's stomach clench. She hated the horse, hated its defiance, and the way it made her father look foolish. But the thought of destroying something so powerful and alive felt like a sacrilege. "He'll break." The colonel grunted, his gaze fixed on the furious stallion. "Everything has a breaking point." It was then that Arabella saw him. A man standing by the far side of the corral, partially obscured by the stable block. He wasn't one of their hands. She knew every man on the payroll, and this one was a stranger. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn, dust-caked denim, and a battered hat that shadowed his face. He was the picture of a common drifter, the kind of man who worked for a week and disappeared with the sunrise. He was watching Ares, but not with the fear or morbid curiosity of the other hands. He was watching with an unnerving stillness, an intensity that seemed to block out the rest of the world. A sudden possessive anger flared in Arabella. That horse, for all its trouble, was a Sutton horse. It was her property. The idea of this nobody gawking at it felt like a trespass. "Who is that?" she demanded, her voice sharp. The colonel and Sterling followed her gaze. "Just some drifter," the colonel dismissed. "Rode in this morning looking for work. The foreman Miller told him we weren't hiring." "Well, he seems to be having trouble taking the hint," Arabella said, pushing away from the fence. She strode around the corral, her boots kicking up little puffs of dust. The man didn't move as she approached, his attention still locked on the horse. As she got closer, she could see more of him. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps, in his mid-20s. His face, what she could see of it beneath the hat's brim, was lean and weathered with a strong jawline covered in dark stubble. He looked tired, worn thin by the road, but there was a quiet solidity to him, a rootedness that seemed at odds with his transient appearance. As she came to a halt, a few feet away, he finally seemed to notice her. He slowly turned his head, and his eyes met hers. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, the color of a winter sky, and they held a deep, unsettling calm. He gave a slight, respectful nod. "Ma'am." His voice was low and raspy, like stones rolling in a dry creek bed. "This is private property," Arabella stated, foregoing any pleasantries. "You were told we aren't hiring." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his gaze flickering back to the stallion who had paused its rampage to watch them, its flanks heaving. "I was just leaving, but I saw the horse." "Everyone's seen the horse," she snapped, irritated by his placid demeanor. "He's a menace." "He's not a menace," the man said softly, his eyes still on Ares. "He's terrified." Arabella almost laughed. Terrified. That creature of pure rage. "He's a devil is what he is, and you have no business being here." She expected him to apologize, to shuffle his feet and retreat. He didn't. He just kept watching the horse, a strange, sad look in his winter blue eyes. Then he did something that made the air leave her lungs. He moved toward the corral fence. It was a slow, deliberate movement, utterly devoid of threat. But it was so audacious, so contrary to every instinct of self-preservation, that she was momentarily stunned into silence. "Get away from there," she hissed, finding her voice. "Are you insane? He'll kill you." He didn't seem to hear her. He reached the fence, and instead of climbing over, he did something even stranger. He began to unlatch the gate. A cold dread washed over Arabella, quickly replaced by a hot surge of fury. "Stop! What in God's name do you think you're doing? I will have you thrown off this ranch myself." Her shouts attracted the attention of her father and Sterling, who were now striding purposefully toward them, their faces grim. "Here now, you," the colonel boomed. "Step away from that gate." The drifter ignored them all. He swung the heavy gate open just wide enough to slip inside the corral. He didn't close it behind him. He just stood there, inside the enclosure, with 1,000 pounds of murderous horseflesh not 30 feet away. Ares watched him. Head high, nostrils flared every line of its body, screaming imminent violence. The other ranch hands, who had been watching from a safe distance, were now shouting warnings, their voices thick with alarm. The man took off his hat, revealing a tangle of dark brown hair. He held the hat in his left hand down by his side. He didn't look at the horse's eyes. He looked at its feet, its chest, anywhere but the eyes. And then he began to speak. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, steady murmur, a cadence that was almost musical. The words were too quiet for Arabella to make out, lost in the wind and the nervous stamping of the horse. But the tone carried. It was gentle, reassuring, a sound that had no place in this arena of fear and violence. Ares snorted, a plume of dust exploding from his nostrils. He took a stamping, aggressive step forward, then another. The man didn't flinch. He just kept murmuring. His body relaxed, his posture non-threatening. He took a slow, shuffling step to the side, turning his body slightly, making himself smaller. It was the most terrifying, most mesmerizing thing Arabella had ever seen. She felt her father grab her arm, ready to pull her back, but she was frozen, her gaze locked on the scene unfolding before her. Sterling stood beside them. His smugness gone, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. The stallion tossed its head, its powerful neck muscles cording. It took another step, then paused. The furious, panicked energy seemed to be draining out of it, replaced by a tense curiosity. The man took another slow, sideways step. He was closer now, well within the lethal range of those hooves. He was still murmuring that same low, hypnotic rhythm. And then he slowly, so slowly, lifted his right hand. He didn't extend it toward the horse. He brought it up to his own chest, then to his face, then ran it through his own hair, a gesture of self-soothing. He did it again. Ares watched the hand. The wildness in his eyes began to soften. The pinned-back ears flickered, then relaxed, swiveling to catch the man's soft words. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that was half snort, half sigh. The man lowered his hand and took one more small step. He was almost beside the horse now. He turned his back to the stallion's head, a gesture of such profound trust that it seemed like madness. He stood there for a long moment, murmuring before he slowly, gently lifted his hand and touched the horse's neck. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Arabella felt her own breath catch in her throat. She expected the horse to explode, to savage the man, to finally unleash the devil everyone knew was inside him. But Ares did not explode. He trembled, a fine shudder running through his massive frame. But he stood his ground. The man's hand rested on the sleek black coat, then began to stroke it, a long, firm, reassuring motion. From his neck, the hand moved to his shoulder, then down his back. The horse, the untamable devil. The killer leaned into the touch, its head dropping, its eyes half closing. The silence that fell over the ranch was absolute. The only sound was the wind, the soft murmur of the drifter's voice, and the sound of Arabella's own heart hammering against her ribs. She stared, her mind reeling, her anger and indignation dissolving into a profound, world-altering shock. Who was this man? This poor, nameless cowboy, who had just walked into the pen with a monster, and with nothing but his voice and a gentle hand had found not a devil, but a terrified soul. She felt her father's grip on her arm tighten his knuckles white. Sterling beside her swore softly under his breath, but Arabella could only stare at the drifter, this impossibility in worn denim, who now stood stroking her father's untamable horse as if they were old friends. The world she knew, a world of fences and brands of power and control, had just been turned upside down, and in its place was a question that burned in her stormy eyes. "Who are you?" The man finally turned his head, his calm, winter-blue eyes finding hers across the corral, and in that moment, Arabella felt a tremor of something far more unsettling than shock. It was fear, but not of the horse. It was fear of the man, and the unknown world. He represented a world where power didn't come from wealth or a name, but from a quiet, inexplicable understanding she couldn't begin to comprehend. The quiet in the corral stretched until it was thin and taut, ready to snap. The drifter, whose name no one had yet bothered to learn, continued his gentle ministrations, his hand moving with a practiced hypnotic rhythm over the stallion's massive form. Aras. The god of war looked less like a deity of conflict and more like a parishioner receiving a blessing. His posture softened, his breathing deep and even. Colonel Sutton was the first to recover. He released his daughter's arm and strode forward, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel, the sound unnaturally loud in the charged silence. His face was a thundercloud of conflicting emotions. Fury at the man's audacity, deep-seated humiliation that a common drifter had succeeded where his own seasoned hands had failed, and a flicker of avaricious curiosity. "You, in the corral." The colonel's voice was a low growl stripped of its usual booming authority. "What's your name?" The man didn't look up immediately. He gave the stallion one last reassuring pat on the shoulder before turning to face his interrogator. He walked slowly toward the gate, and Ares, untethered, took a hesitant step to follow him, before stopping. "Jedediah Stone," he said, his voice calm and even. He stopped just inside the gate, putting himself between the colonel and the horse, a subtle but unmistakable act of protection. "Jedediah Stone," the colonel repeated, tasting the name. It was a plain, solid name. The name of a farmer, a blacksmith, or a drifter. It was not the name of a man who should possess such a gift. "And where did you learn to do that?" He gestured vaguely at the now docile horse. Sterling Hayes had composed himself, his usual mask of smooth superiority, clicking back into place, though his eyes remained fixed on Jedediah with a new, calculating intensity. "Some kind of circus trick, I'd wager," Sterling drawled, aiming to deflate the moment, to reduce the miracle to mere charlatanism. "Or perhaps he's a gypsy colonel. They're said to have ways with animals." Jedediah's gaze shifted to Sterling, and for the first time, Arabella saw a flicker of something hard in those winter-blue eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that unnerving calm. "No trick, sir," Jedediah said, his address to Sterling laced with a cool, almost mocking formality. "And I'm no gypsy. I just understand horses." "You understand them?" The colonel scoffed, though the word held less derision than he likely intended. His mind was already working, calculating. This man, this Jedediah Stone, was a liability as a drifter, but as an employee, he could be an asset, a very valuable one. "You came looking for work. The offer still stands. I'll pay you double the wage of a top hand to gentle that horse, and any others that need it." It was a generous offer, a stunning reversal from the dismissal he'd received that morning. The ranch hands, who were still lingering wide-eyed, murmured amongst themselves. Double a top hand's wage was a small fortune for a man like Stone. Arabella watched Jedediah, expecting to see gratitude, relief, or at least surprise. She saw none of it. He simply looked at her father, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate the offer, Colonel Sutton," he said slowly, "but I'm not looking to be a horse breaker. I'm just looking for steady work. As a ranch hand, standard wages are fine." A ripple of disbelief went through the small crowd. Sterling let out a short, incredulous laugh. To turn down such an offer was not just foolish, it was an insult. It suggested that money was not his primary motivator, a concept that men like the Colonel and Sterling found both alien and suspicious. The Colonel's eyes narrowed. "You would rather muck out stalls and mend fences for a pittance than use a skill that is clearly worth a great deal more." "My way with horses is my own, sir," Jedediah replied. "It's not for hire, but my back and my hands are. I'll do the work of any other man on this ranch, and I'll do it well." Arabella found herself studying Jedediah with an intensity that unsettled her. His refusal was an act of profound defiance, wrapped in the language of humility. He had seen her father's desperate need, and had refused to be defined by it. He was claiming his own terms, setting his own value, and it had nothing to do with money. In her world, where every man and every beast had a price, Jedediah Stone was an anomaly, a puzzle. Her father, a master of shifting tactics, saw the impasse. To press the point would be to admit his desperation. He gave a curt, dismissive wave of his hand. "Fine." He snapped, his pride stung. "Have it your way. Miller," he bellowed, turning toward his foreman, who was hurrying over. "This man Stone is hired. Put him on the line, crew. Bunkhouse. Standard wages. See that he earns them." The foreman, a weathered man named Miller, with eyes that missed nothing, nodded. "Yes, sir, Colonel." He looked Jedediah up and down, a mixture of awe and professional skepticism on his face. "You heard the Colonel. Grab your gear. I'll show you to the bunkhouse." Jedediah gave a single brief nod to the Colonel. Then his eyes found Arabella's. It was just for a moment, but it was long enough for her to feel that same jolt she'd felt across the corral. It wasn't insolence. It was acknowledgement, as if he saw right through the expensive dress and the haughty posture to the shocked and bewildered woman beneath. He turned, and without a backward glance at the horse who stood watching him go, he followed the foreman toward the cluster of low-slung buildings that housed the ranch hands. "Well," Sterling said, breaking the silence, his voice dripping with condescension, "it seems you've hired yourself a philosopher cowboy Beauregard. I'd watch your silver." The Colonel shot him a dark look. "I'd watch my tongue, Sterling. The man gentled a horse you said should be shot. That's more than your own men could do." The jab hit its mark. Sterling's smile tightened, but Arabella wasn't listening to their verbal sparring. She was watching Jedediah's retreating back, a maelstrom of thoughts and feelings churning within her. His presence was a disruption, a stone tossed into the placid, well-ordered pool of her life. She felt an overwhelming, irritating need to understand him, to solve the puzzle he presented. Why turn down the money? What did he mean his way wasn't for hire? Over the next few days, Jedediah Stone blended into the ranch's rhythm with a quiet efficiency that was almost invisible. He did the work assigned to him, mending fences on the vast northern range, clearing brush, assisting with the herd without complaint or fanfare. He was a good worker, Miller reported to the Colonel, strong, and tireless. He was also a ghost. He spoke when spoken to, but offered little of himself. The other hands, after their initial awe, began to regard him with a mixture of respect and suspicion. He was an outsider who kept to himself, sharing the communal space of the bunkhouse, but none of the camaraderie. Arabella found herself looking for him. She'd ride out to the pastures under the guise of inspecting the cattle, her eyes scanning the line of working men, until she found his tall, lean frame. He never seemed to notice her, his focus always on the task at hand. Yet she felt his presence like a low hum beneath the surface of the day's activities. And there was the matter of the horse. Ares was moved from the breaking corral to a larger pasture, still isolated from the other horses. He remained wild and unapproachable to everyone except Jedediah. Every evening after a long day of labor, Jedediah would walk to the pasture fence. He never went inside. He would simply lean against the rails, and after a few moments, the black stallion would wander over, lowering his head for a gentle touch from the man who was officially just another ranch hand. They would stand like that for 10, maybe 15 minutes, a silent communion against the backdrop of the setting sun. Arabella watched this ritual from the veranda, several times a spy in her own home. The sight stirred a strange and unfamiliar emotion in her, a pang of something that felt dangerously like envy. It wasn't the man she envied or the horse. It was the connection, the quiet, unforced understanding that existed between them. It was a language she didn't speak, a power she didn't possess. Her frustration grew until it became a hard knot in her chest. She was Arabella Sutton. Men deferred to her, sought her favor, feared her father's wrath through her. This man, this Jedediah Stone, with his calm eyes and silent refusals, was somehow immune to the gravity of her world. She decided she would not allow it. She would confront him, break through that wall of silence and get an answer. One evening she waited until she saw him heading toward the stallion's pasture. She let him get there first, let the ritual begin. Then, gathering her skirts, she descended from the veranda and strode across the dusty yard, her purpose a cold, hard line inside her. He heard her approach but didn't turn. Ares, however, did. The horse lifted its head from Jedediah's hand, its ears flattening a low rumble, starting in its chest as it saw her. "Easy, boy," Jedediah murmured, not to her, but to the horse. He gave the stallion a firm, soothing stroke. Arabella came to a stop a few feet from the fence. "Mr. Stone." He finally turned to face her. The fading light of dusk softened the harsh lines of the landscape, but seemed only to deepen the shadows on his face. "Miss Sutton, I want to know why you're here," she said, her tone direct and imperious. A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting thing. "The colonel hired me. I mend his fences." "Don't play games with me," she said, her voice sharp. "You are no ordinary ranch hand. No ordinary man could do what you did with that horse, and no sane man would turn down the money my father offered. So I ask you again, why are you really here?" Jedediah leaned back against the fence, crossing his arms. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and searching, as if he were the one trying to solve a puzzle. "What do you think, Miss Sutton?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Do you think I'm here to steal the horses, seduce the rancher's daughter? Maybe I'm an outlaw laying low until the dust settles on my last job." His words were laced with a gentle sarcasm that pricked her pride. "I think you're a man with a secret," she shot back. "And on this ranch, secrets have a way of coming to light." "Everyone has secrets, Miss Sutton," he said, his gaze drifting back to the horse. "But you're right about one thing. I am here for a reason beyond mending fences, and it has to do with him." He nodded toward Ares. Arabella's curiosity surged, eclipsing her anger. "What about him?" Jedediah turned his full attention back to her. The last rays of the sun caught his eyes, and they seemed to burn with a cold blue fire. "That horse," he said, his voice dropping lower, "is not just any horse. That bloodline, it's called the Cinder Blood. They're bred for speed intelligence and a powerful spirit, but they only bond with one person, and they can hold a grudge. My great-grandfather bred the first of them. My grandfather raised them, and my father lost the last of them." Arabella stared at him, her mind racing. A bloodline, a family legacy. This wasn't some drifter's trick. This was history. This was a claim. "What are you saying?" She breathed the question barely a whisper. "I'm saying," Jedediah said, his voice hard as iron, "that the stallion my father lost, the one that was the pride of our family, was a dead ringer for Ares. He was stolen, sold off in a crooked poker game 20 years ago. The man who cheated my father out of that horse, who took our land and our legacy and left us with nothing, was Beauregard Sutton." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The wind, the dust, the distant lowing of cattle, it all faded into a deafening roar in Arabella's ears. Her father, a cheat, a thief, the foundation of her life, the bedrock of Sutton's crest, suddenly felt like shifting sand. She looked from Jedediah's face, etched with a conviction as old and unyielding as the mountains, to the magnificent black horse, who now seemed not like a possession, but like a living, breathing testament to a generation of injustice. Jedediah Stone wasn't just a drifter. He was a ghost from her father's past, a man who hadn't come for a job, but for something far more valuable. He had come for justice. The weight of Jedediah's claim settled over Arabella like a shroud. For days, she existed in a state of suspended reality. The familiar rhythms of the ranch, the morning call of the foreman, the smell of coffee and bacon from the cookhouse, the sight of her father presiding over the dinner table were all overlaid with a new sinister meaning. Every boast the colonel made about his success, every casual mention of a shrewd deal from his past, now sounded like a carefully constructed lie. She found herself caught in an impossible position. To believe Jedediah was to condemn her own father, the architect of her entire existence. To dismiss him was to ignore the undeniable truth in his eyes and the inexplicable connection he shared with the horse, a horse that was by his telling the living embodiment of his stolen legacy. She was a Sutton, and her loyalty should have been absolute. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root in the fertile ground of her father's own arrogance and the quiet, unshakable dignity of the man he'd wronged. Arabella began to watch her father, not as a daughter, but as a detective. She listened intently during his meetings with Sterling Hayes, who was now a near-constant presence at the ranch, his partnership with the colonel solidifying. Their talk was of expansion of water rights, of squeezing out smaller homesteaders. It was the language of power, and for the first time, Arabella heard the cruelty beneath the commerce. Meanwhile, her interactions with Jedediah became charged with a silent, secret understanding. A shared glance across the dusty yard was enough to convey volumes. He never pressed his claim again, never sought her out to plead his case. He simply did his work, his quiet presence a constant nagging question in her life. This patience, she realized, was more powerful than any accusation. He was allowing her the space to find the truth for herself, a sign of respect that Sterling, with all his fawning compliments, had never shown her. Her search for proof became an obsession. Where would a man like her father hide the evidence of a 20-year-old crime? He was meticulous, a man of ledgers and records. Late one night, fueled by a desperate need for certainty, she crept into his study. The room was a shrine to his own ego. Leather-bound books he'd never read, a globe of the world, and on the wall a framed map of Sutton's Crest, the brand seared into the corner like a royal seal. The roll-top desk was locked. The key, she knew, was always on her father's person. Frustration gnawed at her. She ran her hands over the smooth, polished wood, her mind racing. She was about to give up when her fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible seam on the side of the desk's pedestal. It was a false panel. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pried it open with her fingernails. Inside was a small hidden compartment, and within it lay a single thin leather-bound ledger. It was older than the others on his shelves, the leather cracked and faded. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with her father's precise angular script, detailing transactions from 2 decades ago. She scanned the entries, her breath held tight in her chest. And then she found it. An entry dated 20 years prior. It noted the acquisition of one prime stallion, midnight, from a man named E. Stone. The price listed was a paltry $50, an insult for a horse of that caliber. But it was the notation scrawled in the margin that made the blood drain from her face. One in cards. Deed to Stone Homestead, 160 acres, held as collateral against further debt. Foreclosed. It was all there. The horse, the name, the land. Jedediah's father, E. Stone Elijah perhaps, or Elias, hadn't just lost a horse in a crooked game. He'd lost everything. Her father hadn't just cheated a man. He had destroyed a family. The vast, sprawling empire of Sutton's Crest had been built upon a foundation of theft and ruin. She closed the ledger, the leather feeling slick and vile beneath her fingers. The truth was a physical weight crushing the air from her lungs. She slipped the book into the voluminous pocket of her dressing gown and crept back to her room. Her mind a whirlwind of anger, shame, and a terrifying, uncertain resolve. The next day, Sterling and her father announced their plan at dinner. They had successfully leveraged the debt of a number of smaller ranches in the valley and were planning a series of coordinated foreclosures. They spoke of it with the casual satisfaction of men planning a hunt. "It's simple economics, Arabella," the colonel said, noticing her pale face and untouched plate. "The weak fall, the strong survive. It's the law of nature, and it's the law of this land." Was Elijah Stone weak? Arabella asked, her voice quiet but clear as a bell. The name dropped into the comfortable atmosphere of the dining room, like a stone into a still pond. Her father froze a forkful of steak halfway to his mouth. Sterling looked from the colonel to Arabella, his expression sharp with confusion and suspicion. The colonel slowly lowered his fork. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Where did you hear it? Does it matter?" Arabella pressed her heart, pounding. She could feel the precipice before her. "You took his horse. You took his land. You built this house on his ruin. Did you think it would just be forgotten? That his son wouldn't one day come looking for an answer?" The mask of the benevolent patriarch dissolved, revealing the cold, hard man beneath. "The drifter," he snarled, "that half-breed horse whisperer, has been filling your head with lies." "Is this a lie?" Arabella retorted, pulling the small ledger from her pocket and slapping it down on the polished mahogany table. "Is your own handwriting a lie?" The colonel stared at the book, his face turning a mottled shade of red. Sterling leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a predator's interest as he recognized the book for what it was, a weapon. "So the boy has a claim," Sterling said smoothly, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "A claim with no legal standing after 20 years. All he has is a story, and stories can be silenced." He looked at the colonel, his meaning perfectly, chillingly clear. A man like that, a drifter with no ties. Accidents happen all the time on a ranch this size. The casual menace in his voice horrified Arabella. This was the man she was supposed to marry. This was the world she was born into. "No," she said, standing so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "You will not harm him. I will do what is necessary to protect what is mine," the colonel roared, slamming his fist on the table. "And you, daughter, will remember your place. You are a Sutton. This ranch is your inheritance. You will not throw it away for some sentimental fantasy about a stable boy. It's an inheritance built on a crime," she cried, her voice breaking with the force of her conviction. "It's not mine. It was never truly yours." She turned and fled the room, the sound of her father's indulged shouts following her. She ran from the house, from the lies and the suffocating weight of her legacy, her only thought to find Jedediah to warn him. She found him not at the bunkhouse, but in the stables, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up as she burst in his face, calm in the lantern light. "They know," she gasped, breathless. "My father Sterling. They know I know the truth. They're talking about silencing you. An accident. Jed, you're not safe here." He showed no fear, only a deep concern for her. He took a step closer, his presence steady and reassuring in her storm of panic. "And you, Arabella? Are you safe? You defied your father for me, for the truth." The use of her first name felt both startlingly intimate and perfectly natural. "I couldn't let them," she started, her voice trembling. "What they did, what they're planning to do, it's wrong." "Men like them don't see right and wrong," Jedediah said, his voice grim. "They only see power and obstacles, and right now I'm an obstacle." Suddenly, a shout came from outside, followed by the frantic whinnying of horses. "Fire, fire, in the main stable." Jedediah and Arabella exchanged a look of pure horror. The main stable housed dozens of the ranch's best horses, including Aries. They ran outside into a scene of chaos. Flames were already licking up the dry timber of the stable's roof, smoke billowing into the night sky. Ranch hands were running everywhere, shouting, forming a disorganized bucket brigade from the main well. But it was a controlled, malevolent chaos. Arabella saw Sterling Hayes near the well, not helping, but directing men with a cold, strategic calm, sending them to the far side of the fire, away from the main doors where the horses were trapped. And she saw her father standing near the house, his face illuminated by the flickering orange light, watching the blaze with a look of grim satisfaction. It wasn't an accident. It was a message, and a murderous solution. It would destroy the evidence, the horse, and provide the perfect opportunity for Jedediah Stone to meet with an unfortunate accident in the confusion of the rescue. "They're trapping the horses inside," Jedediah said, his voice tight with fury. He grabbed a wet sack from a water trough. "I'm going in." "No, Jed, it's a trap," Arabella cried, grabbing his arm. "They want you in there. The horses don't deserve to die for what your father did," he said, his blue eyes locking onto hers, filled with a fiery resolve that dwarfed the flames before them. "Neither do you. Now stand back!" He pulled his arm free and sprinted toward the inferno, disappearing into the churning smoke and roaring flames of the stable. Arabella watched him go, her heart seizing with a terror that was colder and more profound than any she had ever known. She had started this by seeking the truth, and now the truth was about to burn everything to the ground, with the only honest man she had ever met trapped square in the middle of it. The heat from the burning stable was a physical blow, a wall of scorching air that drove the panicked ranch hands back. The screams of the trapped horses were a sound from hell, a chorus of pure terror that tore at Arabella's soul. She watched the doorway, through which Jedediah had vanished, a gaping maw of black smoke and pulsing orange flame, convinced she had just seen him run to his death. Her father and Sterling had miscalculated. They had assumed Jedediah was just a quiet man. They hadn't understood that his stillness masked a courage as fierce and unyielding as the fire itself. Moments that stretched into an eternity passed. The bucket brigade was a futile effort, their splashes of water turning to steam before they even touched the blaze. Sterling continued his performance, shouting orders that accomplished nothing, his face a mask of false concern. Arabella saw it for what it was, a cruel stage play designed to end in tragedy. Then a shape emerged from the smoke. It was Jedediah. His face blackened with soot, his shirt scorched. He wasn't alone. He was leading a string of 4 terrified horses. His voice a constant calming murmur that somehow cut through the roar of the fire. The horses' eyes were wild, but they followed him, trusting the steady presence in the midst of chaos. He got them clear and slapped their rumps, sending them galloping into the safety of a far pasture, before turning back to the inferno without hesitation. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of focused action. He plunged back into the stable again and again, each time emerging with more animals, his body moving with an economy of motion that spoke of deep exhaustion, but an unbreakable will. The other ranch hands, shamed and inspired by his singular bravery, abandoned the useless bucket brigade and followed his lead, grabbing wet cloths and rushing in to help lead the remaining horses out. The rescue effort, leaderless moments before now, had a center, a focal point of courage. Arabella could only watch her fear for Jedediah, warring with a fierce, burning pride. He wasn't just saving horses, he was exposing the cowardice of her father and Sterling with every animal he brought to safety. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, Jedediah stumbled out of the smoke for the last time. He was leading a single horse, the great black stallion, Aries. The horse was trembling violently, a shallow, bloody gash along its flank, where a falling timber had grazed it. But it was alive. Jedediah himself was swaying on his feet, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. A heavy, smoldering beam crashed down behind them, sealing the entrance to the stable, which was now a lost cause, a funeral pyre for wood and hay. Jedediah led Aries a safe distance away and leaned against the stallion's side, his strength finally giving out. Arabella ran to him, her fine dress forgotten, her hands reaching out to steady him. "Jedediah," she breathed, her voice thick with relief and tears. "You're alive!" He coughed a deep, racking sound and spat a black glob onto the dust. "They're all out," he managed to say, his hand stroking Aries' neck. "All of them." It was then that the Colonel and Sterling approached their play over. The fire had served its purpose, but not with the outcome they had intended. Instead of eliminating a problem, it had turned a quiet drifter into a hero in the eyes of every man on the ranch. "A foolish risk, Stone," the Colonel said, his voice attempting to reclaim its authority. "But a brave one. You've saved me a considerable amount of stock." Jedediah slowly pushed himself upright, his soot-streaked face a mask of cold fury. He looked past the Colonel, his winter blue eyes locking onto Sterling Hayes. "This was no accident," Jedediah said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. "This was your doing. You'd burn living creatures alive to cover a 20-year-old crime." Sterling scoffed, his composure flawless. "You're delirious from the smoke, Cowboy. You have no proof of such an outrageous accusation." "Don't I?" Arabella stepped forward, positioning herself beside Jedediah. She held up the small leather-bound ledger. Her voice did not tremble. It was cold and sharp as steel. "This is all the proof I need, and every man here who saw you send them away from the stable doors while he—" she gestured to Jedediah, "ran inside is all the proof he needs." A murmur went through the assembled ranch hands. They looked from the heroic, exhausted figure of Jedediah to the immaculate, sneering face of Sterling Hayes, and then to the hard, unmoving visage of the Colonel. Loyalties forged over years of pay and obedience were shattering in the firelight. "This is madness," the Colonel blustered. "She's hysterical. And you—" he jabbed a finger at Jedediah, "are fired. I want you off my land by sunrise." "This isn't your land," Jedediah said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not all of it. 160 acres of it, the heart of this valley, belonged to my father. You built your fortune on a stolen foundation, Sutton, and now it's time to pay it back." The confrontation hung in the air, thick and volatile. But the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The Colonel's authority was a hollow shell exposed by the fire and his own daughter's defiance. Sterling, seeing the tide turn against them, made a final desperate move. "He's a thief and a liar," Sterling shouted, pulling a small derringer from his coat pocket. "And he's not leaving this ranch alive." He aimed the pistol not at Jedediah, but at Arabella. It was a cowardly, spiteful act, his last attempt to control the situation through terror. But before he could fire, before anyone could even react, there was a blur of black motion. Ares, who had been standing quietly beside Jedediah, exploded into action. With a furious scream that was part rage and part loyalty, the stallion reared up its powerful front legs, striking out like pistons. A hoof caught Sterling squarely in the chest, the sound a sickening crunch of breaking bone. He was thrown backward, landing in a crumpled heap, the derringer flying from his grasp. He didn't move. A stunned silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. The ranch hands stared at the unmoving form of Sterling Hayes, then at the magnificent stallion who stood protectively over Jedediah and Arabella, its head high, its eyes blazing with a fierce intelligence. The horse hadn't just been saved, it had returned the favor. The Colonel looked at the scene before him, his chosen son-in-law broken on the ground, his ranch hands staring at him with contempt, his daughter standing beside the man he had tried to destroy, and the horse, the living proof of his crime, acting as their guardian. In that moment, Beauregard Sutton finally broke. The iron will that had built an empire rusted and collapsed. He seemed to shrink the years of ruthless ambition, sloughing off him, leaving only a tired, defeated old man. He turned without another word and walked slowly back to the house, a king abdicating his stolen throne. In the days that followed, the ashes of the stable settled and so did the fate of Sutton's crest. Sterling Hayes was carried off the ranch, his life spared, but his body and reputation shattered. He would never be a threat again. The colonel remained secluded in his study, a ghost in his own mansion, refusing to see anyone. The truth, as it always does, came out. The story of the fire of Jedediah's heroism and of the colonel's long-buried crime spread through the valley. The ledger in Arabella's possession was an undeniable testament. Arabella stood with Jedediah on the veranda, looking out over the vast expanse of land. It no longer felt like a kingdom to her. It felt like a responsibility. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "The law might not be able to touch him after so long." Jedediah said, his gaze distant. "And I don't want revenge. I just wanted the truth to have its day. I wanted my father's name to be cleared." "The ranch," she began. "I can't run it alone, and I won't run it under the Sutton name alone." She turned to him, her stormy eyes clear and direct. "This land is as much yours as it is mine, Jedediah Stone. More, maybe. It needs a conscience. It needs a heart. It needs you." A slow smile spread across Jedediah's face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his weary features, lighting him up from within. "Stone and Sutton," he mused, trying the sound of it. "It has a certain ring to it." He looked at her, his winter blue eyes warm. "But on one condition." "Anything," she said. "We do it our way. No more squeezing out the little guy, no more foreclosures based on greed. We build something that lasts, something honest. An empire built on conscience," she said, a feeling of hope, pure and clean, as the Montana air rising in her chest for the first time. "I think I'd like that." He reached out and took her hand. His was calloused and rough from work, and hers was soft and smooth, but they fit together perfectly. Below them in the newly built corral, Ares watched them, his black coat gleaming in the sun. He was no longer a devil, no longer a prisoner. He was a symbol of a legacy reclaimed, and the guardian of a new beginning forged in the heart of the fire. That's where our story on the plains ends. But it's really just the beginning for Jedediah and Arabella. They showed everyone that true power isn't about the land you own or the name you carry, but about the courage in your heart and the truth you're willing to fight for. Their story became a legend in that valley, a reminder that even after the deepest betrayals and the most devastating fires, something new and strong can be built from the ashes. If their story of love loss and redemption moved you, please help us share it by hitting that like button. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a powerful story. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. And ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next tale from the annals of history. Thanks for listening.